People are hired for their knowledge and experience, promoted for their success, and fired for their behavior. 87% of 1,500 people were fired for their behavior. I don't care where they are or the religion. If we have the same values and beliefs, we can change the world together. Do you want to hire somebody with 10 years of experience on the resume, but it's 1 year repeated 10 times? Or do you hire somebody who just graduated university and has the wisdom and knowledge of 10 years experience? I always get upset because I'm figuring out what does 5 years experience really mean? So I challenge my clients when they say that. Within 18 months, culture change efforts fail between 80 to 85% of the time. Purpose of business is not to make profit. Profit is a byproduct of doing business correctly.
Okay. That's interesting because David, I'm very excited and happy to have you on the Core Impact podcast.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I have many things that I'm curious to know from you about. And one thing that I'm noticing that people and professionals feel disconnected at workplace. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, what are the root causes of that?
They're disconnected, I think, because they don't feel there's a purpose and a meaning. I think that they see it just as a job. It's just they come to work to get a paycheck, pay their mortgage, pay their rent, feed their family, and move on. And as a result of that, there's no purpose. One of the things that I always work with my clients on is what I call creating a line of sight, which means what are the fundamental ethical foundations of the organization? What are the values? But more importantly, the authentic values, not aspirational values. What's real? And not what's on the wall necessarily, but what's real, what's authentic. What are those behaviors that exemplify living those values? That's the foundation for anything. Second thing is, what's the vision? What's something that's going to be emotional, a purpose to move us forward? What's your, the analogy is that North Star. But I look at it as something which pulls you forward, something you aspire to continuously, but probably will never achieve while you're working there. But it's worthwhile moving to. And there's a strategic plan. Now, here's where companies, I think, lose it. The strategic plan's correctness is measured by, will it cause our employees to live the values or violate them? And will it move us towards our North Star? If either of the answers are no, change the strategic plan. Don't change your North Star and don't change your values, because they join the company where they believe they're at the company if they're committed because of those values and because of the North Star. But because of pressures from boards of directors or because of pressures with the global economy going on, people chase the near-term success without realizing there's a long-term future. Organizations in Europe have less of a problem with that because they've been around longer and they realize they'll survive and they can do the right thing. But in North America, they're always chasing these 90-day plans and changing according to the economy or according to pressure from wherever. Companies that stick with their values, stick with their vision, stick with their purpose, have always outperformed those that don't. So I think that's really important. So the strategy then becomes divided into each of the division, each of the groups within the organization, which then each team picks that up and then each individual. So if I as an individual know that I can contribute to my team's success, which contributes to the division's success, which moves the organization towards something meaningful, and I'm living in an environment which is what colloquially is called psychologically safe, which means you're being lived, then I want to work here. And I will take accountability. I will take ownership of my commitments. I remember working with one pharmaceutical company, and I'm doing a focus group with maintenance workers. And one of the maintenance workers came late. And basically the conversation boiled down to these gentlemen in the maintenance group said they're the most important people in the entire plant. And this is a pharmaceutical company that is, at the time, was known for making the world safer for children through vaccines. That was their vision. So they always were moving towards that. Physicians, employees would take their vacation time to go to third world countries to teach how to use the vaccinations. It was a very powerful organization. So I challenged this one young man who came in late, and I said, "Why do you think you're the most important person here?" He said, "Because I was fixing an incubator thermostat. And if I didn't fix it on time, research on childhood cancer would go away. If I don't clean the bathroom and somebody falls and has a concussion, we can block having that research done. We're the most important people in this place." And they take ownership of it. They take pride in that. So when you have employees that take pride in that and understand that they are part of the solution, they're part of the success, and they get recognized for them, not financially.
Mm,
Because people, I say finance is a hygiene factor. You took the job because you believe it's going to pay your bills. Once that is settled, it's off the table. What comes next is, do I feel that I am making a contribution to something important? And you see that all the time. And you see that's meaningful. And when that happens in organizations, people are successful. And when leaders have the courage to live their values and withstand pressure from the outside world, then the organization rallies behind them and they become more successful.
mm. There are several things came to my mind, but before diving deep into the discussion, I would like to know from you, is there any story when you look back that shaped the way you think about culture change, and maybe also a mistake or something that when you look back, you say that was a turning point where I changed my perspective about it.
Well, I'd say it happened when I was very young because of my parents and their commitment to social justice
Mm,
and doing the right thing in the face of not believing that the world wasn't necessarily acting right. And so I have, since I was very young, always been aware of the concept of what are values, and without knowing they were called values necessarily, but there was a belief system that even if the rest of the world wasn't acting correctly, you had to stand up and act correctly. And in the long run, it was doing the right thing. I mean, I can remember back to when I was very young, we were playing ball and some kid came along and started to tease me because I was skinny as could be. My grandfather used to joke that I was so skinny, if I stood sideways, I wouldn't get wet in a rainstorm. And some kid started teasing me, and this other older friend of mine, much older friend of mine, tall, came along and basically scared that kid off. And that kid never bothered anybody again. And then later on, I paid that forward with somebody. And without knowing it, that his father was a caterer. And when we were getting married and my mother went to this guy to cater our wedding, he said, "Well, I'm already booked for that." But he remembered and recalled that I helped his son protect his son when he was younger. And he said, "So I will find a way of doing it for you." Now, I never even remembered I did that until my mother told me the story of why he was catering. So you just do it because you know it's right and you don't necessarily think of the consequences. And you have lots of stories of that. You have stories of um, that I just published. I just put on LinkedIn this week an article on the concept that integrity is not a value unto itself. Integrity is the sum total of living your values. And I give 3 examples there of 3 CEOs who, one from Merck, one from Patagonia, and I forgot the other one, uh, who did what was not popular but was right. And they had lots of pushback from shareholders, competitors. Oh, Unilever. And Unilever decided that they were going to not play the 90-day game, but the long game. and they were going to do what was right for and respectful to their employees. And Kraft Foods tried to take him over, but the organization, people rallied around the CEO because he did the right thing. And Unilever has exponentially grown since then. So it just proves over and over again that in the long run, living the corporate values will outlive doing what's the short term reward for longer term pain.
Mhm.
So it's been part of me all along.
David, you mentioned also when you were talking in the beginning of the psychological safety, right? So,
Right.
from your work, what do you think are like the most practical and simplest tips for companies to practice that, to cultivate that, and to make people not like, or the employees not fear to be free and to be themselves?
I think that every organization, knowingly or unknowingly, has a set of values that are the foundation of its culture. And when organizations know that and they live that and they hire people who fit that culture in advance, I mean, everybody's talking about skills today. I have this, when I started in consulting, I left education. And one of the first things I was working on um, was at a major consulting firm, was a curriculum on customer service. But I really didn't know a lot about business from that point of view coming out of education, even though I studied organizational behavior. And I did a lot of research, and I came up with this concept that people are hired for their knowledge and experience, promoted for their success, and fired for their behavior. And when we did research on that, 87% of 1,500 people were fired for their behavior. And if you can get the behavior right, you can learn the skill and knowledge. You can become successful. So if you are working in an organization where you know that the behaviors are aligned with your own belief system, it's going to be psychologically safe from the beginning. It's
Mm,
when organizations say one thing and do another.
mm,
It's like organizations. I love it when they say we're driving for innovation, and then somebody makes a mistake. It costs a little bit too much money, and they get fired. Well, innovation means risk taking and making mistakes. So if you're going to say risk taking and making mistakes is part of it, psychological safety says we learn from our mistakes, we pass that along so other people learn, and nobody gets fired for it. So, but if somebody does get fired, I don't care what kind of communication system you have, word of mouth very quickly, that gets through the whole organization. And therefore people all say it's not worth. So what they do is they take what I joke about is intelligent risk taking. They figured everything out. They know it's going to work. And while it might be slightly different what they did before, it's not going to fail. So it's intelligent risk taking. Well, that's not really risk taking. Risk taking is I'm not sure it's going to work. And if it doesn't work, what can I learn from it and not get fired? That makes it psychologically safe. So I think there's a lot of hoopla about psychological safety, but what it boils down to is making a promise with employees you're going to treat them a certain way and then treat them that way. And therefore it's predictable.
mm,
So, going back to that pharmaceutical company, the maintenance staff was unionized and they would threaten to go on strike, but they never did because they were so committed to not shutting the plant down, which would cause the creation of vaccines to make the world safer for children be delayed. But the organization always cooperated with them according to their values. So they knew that they can negotiate in good faith and move forward. So it's something which is, it makes it a safe place if I know how the music's going to end, if somebody only plays half of it.
mm. David, since also you talked about hiring the right people, now I'm thinking about your last book, Selecting the Best. And there are two questions here that I'm thinking about. The first one is, what is your intention behind writing the book?
The intention was, I believe that it was a combination. First of all, my first book, The Talent Edge, was written 20 something years ago. And I've had lots of experience globally teaching behavioral interviewing around the world and working on values and seeing that values, hiring for values creates a good fit, creates psychological safety. And that first book didn't really focus on that. Plus, I realized in the first book, there's things I learned from clients that I can improve upon. So the second book was a combination of driving the point home that hiring for fit to values leads to long-term success and also improve upon the behavioral interviewing that I talked about in the first book. So the intention was to try to get organizations to realize, especially in this time where, skills has become such a focus. My fear is we're going to go back to the 1950s and 60s where people get hired for skills and nobody gets along with them.
Mm,
And for organizations, well, if you have conflict, it's not a psychologically safe place. So, and also to put aside this argument that hiring for values fit is hiring the same kind of people from the same background. So in the book, I highlight how different organizations around the world can hire people from different religions, can hire people from different educational backgrounds, and they can have the same values and the same behaviors because they're human beings and these are universal beliefs and that not everybody's going to fit. Some people have different values. So if you hire people that are in conflict, you're not going to have success. But if you hire people that can argue profusely over how to proceed, how to make a decision, but they all have the same value belief, so they all in the end want the same thing, they can go out and have a beer afterwards together and have a good time. I mean, I've worked in Saudi Arabia. I've worked with two companies in Saudi Arabia. I've worked in the UAE. I've worked in India. I've worked in Malaysia. I've worked in Singapore, as well as Europe and the US. And they're people I get along with really well. And I don't care where they are or the religion. It's if we have the same values and beliefs, we can change the world together, make the world
mm,
a better place, make corporate life a better place.
mm. And do you think that is it like defining or knowing your values, first of all, as a person and also as a company, is something that should be more natural, or there's a process you have to go through to know them?
Oh, it happens naturally, no matter what.
Uh,
It
uh,
happens because we bring our values. We don't leave for work and say, okay, when we get on the bus or we get in our car, we neatly fold up our values and put them on a shelf and we wear them again when we come home. They go with us wherever we go.
uh,
In startup companies, too often people hire their friends and families, even though they've gotten along. They don't necessarily have the same values. And when crisis comes up at work, that comes to the forefront. And then it creates problems. And I hired the wrong guy, but he's my brother-in-law and I can't get rid of him or that. And then the startup doesn't go so well. So I think this is something that people have to realize. The values are the evolution from the belief system, usually of the founders. And that's passed on from generation to generation of employees.
uh,
And when the CEO comes in and says, or hears from the board, we have to change the culture. No, they have to celebrate the culture of what originally made the organization strong and change the strategic plan. I mean, Nardelli came in from GE, which was considered the golden child of corporate world back then. And he tried to change the values and the belief system and the structure of Home Depot, and he failed miserably. And when his successor, who also was from GE, came in, he talked to the founders and said, what made this organization great? What were those little things that you did? What were those behaviors? How did you treat people? And he adjusted to what Home Depot was, didn't expect Home Depot to adjust to him. So I think that there's a mistake when boards say you have to change the culture. I think it's a back to the future exercise. You have to go back and find out what was the culture, what were the values, the belief system when that organization was great. And there's still employees there that were living with that and long for it. And by going back to that, you energize them and you bring them forward and make them part of the solution. But going against their belief system just creates friction.
mm. I would like to highlight two things before asking the next questions that you mentioned. First of all, values over skills, let's say, in short. And
Say
that's
when you're hiring, if the person has a foundation for it,
mm,
not that they've are totally out in left field unless it's something very simple, but if they have a foundation for it or an interest in it, yes. One of the things in my book, I use a case study of in Corpus Christi of a plant that was being created. And when they went for the first round of hiring, there was a gentleman whose resume didn't quite fit the engineering skills that the CEO was looking for. But when he interviewed him, he realized he had all the right behaviors and that the transfer of knowledge from the engineering background he had with help and support could teach him the engineering that he needed. And he turned out to be one of their best employees. But
mm,
before he looked at it from a behavioral point of view, he would never hire him. And one of my very first clients was Michelin Tires, working with entry level engineers, hiring, and of course, their turnover was very high. And in doing the research, one of the things that people liked about joining Michelin in Nova Scotia was I joined as an engineer in this area. And 10 years later, it's as if I have a degree in 7 different engineering degrees
mm,
because I keep learning new things. So knowledge is transferable. People that have an interest and a passion in what you're doing, believe it's a safe place to work, they'll go out and they'll learn what they have to learn. And so if you hire people just based on skill and experience, and the other thing that I have a pet peeve about is 2 things: years experience and degrees. Um, there's some very, very intelligent people out there that never went to university who can run circles around all of us. And, I always look at it this way. It's sort of like the movie Groundhog Day. Do you want to hire somebody with 10 years of experience on the resume, but it's 1 year repeated 10 times?
mm,
Or do you hire somebody who just graduated university and has the wisdom and knowledge of 10 years experience? I'd rather take the recent graduate. And so you have to really interview carefully and you really look at what motivates them and how they got to where they are today. I always get upset with people that have minimum 5 years experience because I'm figuring out what does 5 years experience really mean
mm,
and what does that add. So I challenge my clients when they say that. Yeah, for physicians or maybe airplane pilots, I like somebody with more hours of experience, but that makes sense, but not necessarily for some of these managerial jobs or some of these other jobs, which don't have life and death decisions involved in them. They can learn, they can come in and be very successful.
mm. While you are listening to the Core Impact podcast, please take a moment to pause and share with me. How do you feel? Are you enjoying the conversation, feeling inspired, or something else? I would love to know your feelings in the comments. The other thing that I would like to highlight is what you said about from your experience, like living abroad in different countries, Gulf, in Asia, in the US, etc., that you could connect much more with people who have different cultures, countries, religion, etc., but have the same value. And I see
Yes.
this in professional setting, also personal level. Yeah.
I was, I'll say it, when one of my clients was the Islamic Development Bank in Jeddah. And two of the gentlemen there, I have remained very close with. They're great guys. I mean, we get along. We talk about things, and what we realized we had a lot in common: um, life experiences and beliefs. So it doesn't matter where you come from; it's about who you are as a person.
Mm,
And judge each person only after you get to know them. Don't go in judging people because you're going to miss some really good people.
mm. There's another question I'm thinking of. So there's research shows that over 70% of HR leaders struggle to connect hiring decisions with companies' values. Would you like to tell me why do you see is this happening?
I think it's just a legacy of what they've done in the past. And if you don't think it's broke, you don't try something new. when it's broke. I mean, I've had a CEO, after they took the behavioral interviewing workshop that I teach, come to me and said, I always thought I was very successful because I've been promoted. I have a very successful company, but I now realize that there were a lot of hiring mistakes I made because I didn't hire on values. And I had a lot of tension and work or protected employees I thought were really good, but in reality, they were creating a very difficult work situation. And so he had wished he had taken this course a long time ago. And I think that people are not, I think people are scared of values. They're scared of saying what their values are because they might
Mm,
offend some.
mm,
But if you don't know what your values are and beliefs, then nobody's going to know.
mm,
So that traditional hiring and values, and I also think people misunderstand values, um, and they think they can change. And that's why culture change doesn't work because values don't. When's the last time you woke up in the morning and said, I'm going to change my values?
mm,
You, you never do. And if I have that value as a worker and some CEO comes along and says, we're changing our values, I'm threatened. That
mm,
bothers me. Successful for 20 years, living these behaviors. Now you want me to change? And one of those is in conflict with what I've already done. I'm looking for a new job and you lose your best employees. So I think people are scared of what values are
mm,
instead of embracing them as a guardrail. It's like going down a highway and the values are the curbstones on that highway. You can go in any of the lanes and still be within the parameters of living that values.
mm,
But once you go up the curb, well, you have an accident. And that's what happens in companies. People then have conflict. So try to stay within it. My definition of value is a strongly held belief, emotionally charged, highly resistant to change, and universally applied. And I think that's where people don't use the universally applied. It's the same for everybody at every level, whether
mm,
you're the intern, whether you're the guy working in the parking lot, or whether you're the CEO, the value is exactly the same. You can't
mm,
have a little bit go along. I joke that values are like being pregnant. You can't be a little bit pregnant. You can't have a little bit of your value.
mm. David, since you said that most people are scared of saying their values, I would like to share my values and listen what are your top values are. So would you like to start with the first 3 to 4 top values you have?
Yeah, my value is human dignity, human respect. My other is learning, education,
Mm,
and the other is is treating people um, well. The respect, there's learning, and there's, I guess, the concept of social justice.
mm. And mine are joy, number 1. Second, connection. The third one is growth. And the fourth one, which I didn't know that I value before, but after going through lots of, let's say, self-reflection, is freedom.
Freedom, social
Yeah.
justice, responsibility, respect, and if you do all that, it adds up to joy.
Yeah.
And that go, and that takes me to my very I'd say not unpopular, but I get pushed back a lot that integrity is not a value.
Mm,
Integrity is the total of living your values.
mm,
Because if joy is one of your values and you do all that other, but there's no joy, and they say that integrity is when you live all your values, well, you live 3 of your 4 values, so you don't have integrity. Integrity is living all your values all the time without exception and without regard to the circumstance. Then
mm,
you have integrity. But if
mm,
you can't live with an excuse for not living one, then where's your integrity? And I work with the Calgary Police Service, and the chief at the time was Christine Silverberg, and she came up with the con. She's the one who put that in clear perspective for me. She came up after a discussion about the police service's values, which basically dated back 100 years with some evolution. But she said, we, the Calgary Police Service, will live our values when we will have integrity when we live our values. And it made a whole lot of sense to me.
Mm, mm. David, also, I have a question here. How can you keep living your values, especially when you have clients that are not, they don't have integrity in this case, like at least not living their values to the fullest?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, and I'm not so glad you asked that. I was working with one company. I had one client in Washington, D.C., who had an executive after they published their values, which were strongly held by the employees, and published their values, and people were excited about it. But there was one of the members of his team wasn't living their values, which gave permission to their direct reports and so down in that division not to live the values, creating conflict. When I talked to him about the need to hold this person accountable to the values, his reaction was, well, values are aspirational. And I said, values, once you publish them, are not aspirational. Everybody expects, especially since our research shows that your employees love these values, have been living them for a long time, and they celebrate them, and that you're creating a problem. And he couldn't get past values being aspirational to justify the behavior of this one person who was doing something strategically he liked, but doing it in the wrong way. And we agreed to disagree, and I wasn't working there anymore. In another case, a telecommunication company, there was a certain culture of lack of access to certain executives, which I needed in order to do my work correctly. And I talked with one of my colleagues, one of my peers in my own company on the subway back from this company. And we agreed to return the retainer check to them and gave them the name of 3 or 4 other consultants that might be willing to do the job for them. I
Mm,
couldn't do it. Just,
mm,
yeah, I wasn't keeping my promise to the people I'd already talked to
mm,
about doing the work the way I described it to them. And if I didn't have the freedom to do that, therefore I wouldn't have the integrity. Therefore, I gave them back the retainer. I'd say that CHRO hasn't talked to me in 20 years since I did that.
mm,
Uh, but that's okay.
mm,
I wear badge of honor. I don't see it as a failure. I see it as a success.
mm,
And I think that's what people have to do when they live their values, even if it doesn't go the way they want. That's a success.
mm,
If you don't live your values and things go well, that's a failure.
mm. You were not afraid of loss, right?
No, I wasn't afraid of loss. As a matter of fact, I was, my only concern was because she was fairly influential in the community, in the HR community, that she would say negative things about me.
Mm,
But what turned out is she didn't, I don't think she said anything because things went well and nobody's ever mentioned it.
mm,
And I've never mentioned the company. So
mm,
we can forward. But even if she did, I am sure there are people who came to me. Well, I had another situation years and years ago when I was first starting and realized they had 2 consultants, myself and this other person who'd already been in there. And she was at the time more seasoned. She was getting along with the leadership team. And there was a lot of other things going on. I went to the CHRO at the time and said, listen, the 2 of us can't do this same project. And she's already doing it well. And that was the first time I said I'd give back the retainer. And she looked at me and said, thank you for being honest. Keep the retainer. I'll find something else for you to do.
mm,
And that evolved into a very long, I worked with her about 4 other companies after that.
mm,
That's evolved into a very positive, strong relationship that went beyond just work.
mm,
So, our values aligned. So it's powerful.
mm. I see how much you have clarity once you know your values because you know yourself more, right? So such difficult decisions become easy for you to make, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what sometimes people, this is where I think some companies go wrong. Some companies will create their strategic plan and change their vision to meet the plan, and then create values to justify that
Mm,
plan.
mm,
And I think that if you know your values, that's the first thing. Is your purpose and values aligned? Once they're aligned, and you create the strategy, and you create the strategy, and then you test it against, will it move us towards our vision or purpose? If no, change the strategy. But if it does, but it will cause our people to violate our values, then change the strategy so it's aligned with the values. I think that's the anchor.
mm,
And the other thing is, a lot of people call a culture change what is really a strategy change. Becoming more innovative is not a strategy. And one example was um, a one of the Canadian provinces, their gambling department division had a very scathing review from the prime minister's office, and they were told they had to change their culture. And the CEO called me up because their CHRO knew me and knew that I worked on this stuff. And the first thing I said to him is, and they wanted me to come out like tomorrow, the next day, which was nice. And I said to him, you got to change your culture and you got to change your values. And I said, so what are two of your values? He said, honesty, and the other one was trust. And I said, so you're no longer going to be honest or trustworthy because you're changing your culture. Oh, no,
mm,
no, we got that, obviously. I said, so you're not changing your culture. You're changing your strategy and adjusting job specific behaviors to align with that strategy while maintaining your values. And that's what they did.
mm,
And they were rapidly successful. So they were one of all the provinces, they were the first doing a lot of things in innovation, in online gambling and other things, way ahead of anybody else as a result of realizing we'll keep our values, keep it psychologically safe, keep it a fun place to work, and we'll change the strategy, but we're not going to change our values.
mm,
And felt safe. It was okay to work there.
mm. You already started with mentioning some misconceptions about culture change. Do you like to mention like the top 1 to 3 biggest misconceptions for leaders?
Well, the first misconception and goes back to is that values don't change. So if values don't change, they evolve very slowly. Therefore, you can't change your culture because culture is based on the behaviors that are rooted in your values. So if you come in and say we're going to blow up the system, you just blew up that foundation for psychological safety. So first of all, second thing, the research, I don't care where it's from, documents that within 18 months, culture change efforts fail between 80 to 85% of the time. Well,
Mm,
the research for the last 30 years has continuously said culture change fails. Then why are people doing it? They just believe consultants that come in and say, we're going to change your culture. And some of it feels good. So there's this initial high, but then it's like a rubber band. People eventually snap back to their original belief system and it doesn't work. And I think one of the mistakes is that people think when there's a merger, that there's a merger and you take the best of both cultures. I do not believe there's mergers, there's only acquisitions. So he who signs the paycheck rules. So it's the CEO, the company the CEO is coming from, whose values are going to permeate the organization.
mm,
And you have an effort to use the best of both worlds. There, you create a competition because then one part of the organization is going to say, well, how come they didn't use this approach, or how come they didn't use this belief, or how come they didn't, so I really liked it when I was working there. And now you've just taken this and kind of shredded it in half. So there's a conflict. And I can tell you that I have personally experienced with my clients talking and overhearing employees argue with each other that, you know, our company was better because we did this. And the other side said, no, our company's better because we do this. And they do it in front of customers. They do it in front of suppliers. And people walk away scratching their head and saying, you know, they got to get their act together first. So I think people should stop thinking about when they think of mergers. Yeah, you can take processes, the best practice of process, but you can't take the best practice of behavior.
Mm.
There's got to be, this is the way it is. And if you don't like it, we should probably give you a severance or a pathway to find a place you'll be happy. You know, it goes to how many people have heard friends complain and cry over being fired from a company because of behavior, meet them a year later and they're as happy as can be because they found a company where they really can get along. So letting a person go sometimes
Mm.
is good for you as a company, but the best thing that ever happened to that person, because you were honest, they're just not working out. You know, you're causing friction. So if you can identify, people scared of identifying behaviors. So if you look at these behavior statements, they often look like a very nicely worded greeting card. They're they're worded very nicely, but they don't mean anything because they don't define a specific behavior. They define maybe an outcome. And that means you can get to that outcome any way you want. And it's not specific enough. The work I do with leaders is really pushing them to say, and their employees, what is the behavior that differentiates success? What does that look like? And the best way of finding those is to find what I call your corporate legends. What are those stories that people talk about? Some employee did something in a difficult time that created energy, positive energy, great results because they had the courage to do what was right, not what was easy. And when you find those corporate legends, you find the behaviors that exemplify your values.
Mm. David, since you talked about courage, I remember I saw you writing or differentiating between safe courage and real courage, right? Could you please expand on this?
Well, safe courage is okay. It goes back to my research with stage development theory around psychology. And Kohlberg, Lawrence Kohlberg had a model for altruism. And that middle level is what he called good boy, good girl relationship. And in that form, you're looking for approval from others to do the right thing. And so that's when kids will look to their parents for approval. They'll do that. I call that safe courage. You know, that it's safe because you're going to get approval for it. Not necessarily because it's the easy thing to do or the right thing to do, but you're going to get approval for it.
Mm.
Courage is when you are pretty sure the consequences aren't going to be very pleasant.
Mm.
Like the gentleman at Unilever, he got pushback from the market. Their stock plummeted. Patagonia, their stock plummeted, but they said, we're going to do the right thing. Patagonia even had this ad on their coats, do not buy this coat, right? But their stock became stronger and stronger. Unilever grew because employees rallied around it, knowing it was the right thing to do based on their values. And when Kraft tried to take them over because they weren't playing the market game, Unilever just succeeded because people supported them. When the gentleman at Merck left the President Trump's his first presidential, he had this commission and he believed that what they were doing was wrong. He quit the commission. His stock price went down. But Merck was concerned about the consumer, the respect for the person that uses their drugs. And he felt that that was not a respectful situation he was in. He got total support from his employees. And in the long run, the price started to go up again because he did the right thing. So courage is when you're not sure or even positive, people aren't going to like it. You do it. One of the examples I have that I just put up on the article on LinkedIn this week is a video clip where um, Schultz from Starbucks is being interviewed about this when he started to give same-sex insurance. And one of the shareholders of the meeting stood up and said that he disagreed with it. And he respectfully said that you got a 35% increase in your share value. If you can go someplace else and get a better increase, please do. But I'm going to do the right thing by my employees. And then they interviewed a gentleman that is on Shark Tank who's called Mr. Wonderful. And they interviewed him on a CBC clip, and he says he was asked if Starbucks was doing the right thing, and he said he's dead wrong. He's supposed to be working for the shareholder, the bottom line. And Schultz's response to that is, he's dead wrong. You do what's right. And that goes back, it's interesting what you said to me, where my values come from. That goes back to Schultz's history of growing up in tenements in a very poor family in Brooklyn, saying that if he ever became a CEO, he would never treat anybody the way his father was treated, and that he'll treat people with respect and dignity,
Mm.
which comes first, business. And I say the purpose of business is not to make profit. Profit is a byproduct of doing business correctly.
Mm. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting because I feel it's right. At the same time, it's not easy. Okay, when you let me ask you this question. When you talk to leaders like that, how do they perceive this? How do they react?
For many of them, it's a thoughtful moment, and they'll say, you're absolutely right. Um, I was working with a company called KMV, which was creating credit scoring for corporations, which was very hard. Companies had tried and failed. They had already failed once under a different name, and they were successful. And when they sold to Moody's eventually, and I was having breakfast in San Francisco with the chairman of the company, and we were talking, he realized they sold for a lesser price because of values fit with Moody's to treat their employees right. They made less money. It wasn't about the money. It was about, we've created something unique, but we did it with our employees. And it was a time when the bubble for the internet was going on and everybody was paying these shares and everything. But these guys were brilliant economists who realized that was a false hope. So what they did is they paid their people more than anybody else, because when the bubble busted, they didn't have any setbacks and they kept paying their people, and they felt doing the right thing, treating them right, was more important than, you know, pursuing the money. Now, you could say that most of the people on that executive committee were independently wealthy already, so they had the luxury of doing the right thing.
Mm.
But knowing those guys, because I worked with them a long time, they would have done the right thing if they were just starting out. And they had done the right thing when they were starting out over the years. It was a habit that they had built up through their
Mm.
values.
Mm.
Doing the right is something, you know, finding joy in the work you do, finding purpose in the work you do, finding that it gives you meaning, um, is going to generate ownership and accountability of your employees. And when they have that ownership and accountability, you're going to meet your expected goals because they're going to work towards it. And if you're doing it without connecting all of that, then you're not doing business right.
Mm.
So I think that's why I would say that success, profit is an outcome of doing things right. It's a
Mm.
byproduct of being successful. It's not the reason for, nobody goes into work Well, there are people that go into work that say, I'm doing this to make millions and millions of dollars. I'm sure if you asked all the guys at Facebook, were they doing this to make millions of dollars back when they were dropping out of Harvard, they would have said, no, I'm just having fun.
Mm.
It turned out they made millions of dollars. Did that change their value system? Did that corrupt their value system? Maybe yes, and maybe that's why they struggle. So that's why I say value sometimes back to the future exercise.
I feel like I need a moment to grasp what you said, because it's really in depth, and this is what I like in the podcast too. That's why I call it core impact podcast, to look about really meaningful and deep stuff. I'm thinking now, what is the question that I will pick to ask you next, to stay in this flow. There were many things in my mind, and I wrote down also. Let me tell you something that I find very, very, very important, and I like that this is also one of your core expertise. And from my experience, when I talk to people, it's like one of the most difficult for your mind to be okay with is the vision, right? I want to see from your view, how do you define the vision, and practically how do you communicate it on a personal and organizational level, and how important it is from your view to really go beyond your limits, because vision should be unrealistic, right? The vision should be something that is beyond what you currently have, and will give you this, what you call it, the compass or the North Star to be where you want to be.
Vision, vision needs to be something meaningful that makes a difference. You know, Coca-Cola had a vision, which unfortunately I think the marketing group got hold of and changed. But Coca-Cola's vision was simple: put Coke in arm's reach of every person in the world. And until everybody in the world has it, we haven't reached our vision. So they did things that said, what are we going to do to get people to drink Coke? And they become the number one soft drink company in the world because they kept on moving towards that. You know, Pepsi's vision was not very inspiring: beat Coke. So your vision, you have to be inspiring. It has to be something that pulls at people to want to move forward. And it doesn't have to be big and grandiose. I mean, I say if a vision is more than a sentence long, it's too long, because then you're trying to explain it. It's very simple. The vision, however, has to be rooted in your values. It has to be, we know these are our values, and that vision that we create second. Now, there are people that create the vision first, when subconsciously they might be aware or might not be aware of their values. So that's why I say get the values first, and then you know that vision is more meaningful. So the vision gives you that direction. It gives you the energy. It gives you the drive to get up on Monday morning and say, I'm going to make a difference today. How do I do something to move us towards that? I worked with Mass General Hospital for number of years, and they're at the time were a 220-year-old hospital that was founded with the belief that we have to keep those who are not as lucky as those. It was founded by those with a lot of money in Boston. So their healthcare back then was done at home. But if their servants, the people that worked for them, went back to a home which wasn't clean, they might not come back to work. So they had to create a hospital that was clean to give them a safe place. And the vision was anybody who came here would get treatment. Very different than the stories you hear of American hospitals now, that if you went to Mass General, they didn't ask you if you had insurance. They asked you, where did it hurt? And they took care of you. And afterwards, they looked for the insurance. And if you didn't have insurance, they were okay with that. Now, the reality is that there were some doctors that didn't do that. And when those doctors left, people celebrated. They were happy the doctor left because they were very proud of what they did. Now the hospitals in crisis because it was taken over by a different group, and it's gone more to a money-making machine, and they lost a lot of the good people. So it's once that value, once that vision is in place, it's going to move you for generations because,
uh,
providing health care for everybody is not, it's a destination, it's a journey. That has a destination you're not going to reach. And that's, I think, what a vision is.
uh,
A vision puts you on a journey toward a destination that you know that you're not going to reach while you're there.
uh,
Otherwise, it's a strategy.
uh. See, David, I'm really inspired, and I want to tell you directly, like, to have the courage to say something that now, thinking about what you said, I'm thinking my vision, if I want to describe my vision, it will be longer than a line, let's say, but I'm going to still say that and just reflected about on it while listening to you. My vision is to remind every person that you cannot define any person based on their identity, their country, their religion, their age, whatever it is, even financial or whatever status, position at work. And yeah, and that's the first step and the most important step to really have more unity because you have lots of separation in all aspects of the world. So it's a bit maybe long. I know it's also, which is, I think this is how the vision should be, very outside that, the mind, right? So maybe you could tell me, how do you think about it? And also if you like to share your vision.
Well, I would say your vision it can be said very, very nicely.
Mm,
My vision is to ensure that people are treated for who they are, not where they come from.
mm,
And where they come from is religion, geography, education, money, etc. So treat everybody once you know them
mm,
and reserve judgment until you know them. My vision is to try to make the world a better place. My my vision comes from a concept in Judaism, which is tikkun olam, is to fix the world, is to make the world a better place. And it's something that we have to do in order to say that I've contributed my life, because my memory is the way my grandchildren remember me and pass on to their children, who I will never know probably. That's my life. That's my world to come, is what I do today in the world, how I'm remembered, is my legacy on how I'll be remembered.
mm.
And that to me is what is important.
David, I really enjoyed and I'm inspired with this conversation. I'm gonna ask you a question here about AI because everyone is talking about AI, and I know also this is one of your interests in the end. So also AI and also a bit about the future, because also one of the topics we talk about the future of work. So how do you think AI will challenge leaders' sense of ethics and integrity in the next decade?
I think that people are relying on AI too much. I think that, and I heard somebody say this, is AI will not replace you, but if you don't use it, you will be replaced. Um, People have to recognize AI has its limitations. AI can give you ideas. You have to review the output of AI and say, does it fit our values? Does it fit what we're trying to achieve? Or is it just a great suggestion based on the way it was programmed? And because it's programmed by humans and humans have conscious and subconscious biases, there's a bias built into that algorithm. So until I find out what that bias is by working with it, I've got to question everything it produces.
Mm,
And I think that people are jumping the bandwagon. Now, remember, AI is less than 3 years old, and it's had this major impact on the world to the point where Amazon is laying off people. And today it was announced that YouTube is laying off people because of AI. And are they running into it too quickly? When you think about automotive companies, when the automobile was created, there were over 400 automobile companies around the world. How many are there today? Because over time, it amalgamates, it gets better, it gets stronger. When the internet started, how many search engines were there? Today there are maybe three search engines people use. So are we jumping into AI? And there's lots of AIs out there. Are we jumping into it too quickly without thinking of the ramifications? So, I did a presentation at SHRM on the ethics of AI in HR. Workday is being sued because its algorithm doesn't recommend for interviewing people over 40 years of age or 45. So there's a class action. It's ageism discrimination. When Amazon created its first algorithm for resume scanning in an effort to try to get more women to be interviewed and hired, it only produced men. Well, when they looked at it and said, well, why are we only getting male candidates? It was based on male resumes that
mm,
was fed into it. They didn't adjust it. So it had a
mm,
built-in bias based on its historical bias. So I think that AI is phenomenal. I use it if I have writer's block, I use it to brainstorm, to come
mm,
up with ideas. And sometimes I look at it and say, that's pretty wacky. And sometimes I say, wow, that's brilliant. Like
mm,
I can take that somewhere, but then I rewrite it in my own words. And there's a tell in AI. If AI wrote it, it uses certain words. They're usually shorter sentences, very short sentences. And there's always that EM, that dash, that long dash. If you see a long dash, 90% of the time it's written by AI. So it's not the person's thinking, it's that machine's thinking. I'd rather give my thinking and I can rely on it to correct it. I'm horrible at spelling. So thank God for Grammarly. And I will say to AI, read this for continuity, spelling, and grammar. And that's what I'll use it for. But
mm,
I think that people are rushing into it too fast. I think that it doesn't account when you're using it for HR purposes. It doesn't account for your corporate values because AI really can't measure behaviors without having an entire story. Um, I was doing an interview and using one of those recordings. I was doing an interview with an executive who had an accent, uh, but it was an English conversation. It kept on putting words in that this person wasn't saying, but it's the way that the machine heard it. So it's not perfect. And I found it interesting. Sometimes it go back and change the word if the context wasn't right to the right word. But sometimes it just give me a word that had nothing to do with what they said. So if I'm using this to interview a candidate and that candidate has an accent, it might be a great candidate, but the AI is going to say they didn't answer it correctly when in fact they did. Um, linguistics is a very powerful thing. Different people, as you and I know, when when you translate from the original language, it's the translator's interpretation of the language. It's not the authentic language which was originally said, because each language has its nuance. And so it's really hard for me to believe that using it for interviewing is you're getting the best possible thing out of it, that you're using it and you've got to read that transcript again and say, did this summary match what the person actually said?
mm,
So that's why I'm saying you can use it, but use it wisely
mm,
and try to build in where you can create your own voice, so to speak. Build in your behaviors, build in your strategic plan, build in your corporate legends, and say, does this person match these things? And it's going to be really hard because you've got to ask some really good behavioral questions for it to be able to do that. And most behavioral questions are not very well written.
mm,
So people should buy my book and find out how to hire for values.
mm. David, you are reminding me to use AI as an assistant and remember that you are the master. Because, for example, now preparing for the questions, I listen to podcasts that you had before, read from your books, LinkedIn posts. I know about you already before, and I have some questions written, but I have also like lots of input that I give to AI, very long list of things. And then I tell them, prepare 30 questions. And from this 30, I pick only 10 to put them on the side. But I know, first of all, I have things that I will ask you anyway. And there will be follow-up questions. I have to be present with you, but at the same time, this was something that assists me to maybe think about things that I could ask you that are relevant for the podcast that I might not have thought about.
I
So,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great tool to provide you assistance in thinking through good ideas.
Mm,
And some of those you're going to look at and say, I don't want to ask that, or I don't want to ask it that way.
mm,
And things you're going to say, well, as we have the conversation, other things will come up and I don't need the questions.
mm. While you are listening to the Core Impact podcast, please take a moment to pause and share with me. How do you feel? Are you enjoying the conversation, feeling inspired, or something else? I would love to know your feelings in the comments. The last thing that I started asking my guests, and they like it and I like it, so I'm gonna do it with you, is there anything that you've been searching on, reflecting on, and you like to see another perspective from someone? So you'd like me to ask this question to a future guest that like who is expert in what you're gonna ask? Is there a question in your mind that you find interesting to get another perspective on how to answer it?
That's an interesting question. I might have to write you an email to give you the answer.
Ah, okay. Okay.
I, I'm always curious as to why do people do what they think is going to get approval from other people and not do what they think is right.
Hmm.
Why do they always, you know, go with the crowd instead of stand up and say, you know, I know it's not popular, but I'm going to stand up and do what's right.
Hmm.
And then they go home and lose sleep
Hmm.
because they know they didn't do the right thing. But it's a good question. Let me think about it. Will email you in the next couple of days an idea.
Okay. Then take your time, and I really enjoyed the conversation with you, David. From the
Thank you
first
for the
time
book.
I saw how much you focus on values, it was something very attractive to me to know about the culture change, the lots of experience, examples, psychological safety. Also talking about courage and different perspective, doing what's right. There were lots of inspiration also when we shared like lots of stories, and I heard from you like stories about your life, about also seeing how people are different when they are from different cultures, but in the end, we all find connection when we not focus on what's important, our values again. So really grateful to have you as a guest, to have this connection with you. The last question is not really a question; it's an open. Either final thoughts you like to share, a question that I haven't asked you like to answer, or anything you like to share in the end.
No, I don't think so. I think that you've covered a lot of area that is very personal to me, very important to me. I just like to find a way that we can have, as you said, find out, get past the superficial things about make us different to the important things that make us the same. And we can live in peace with each other, respect, dignity, and caring for each other.
Mm,
I think that um, there's a lot of misinformation in this world because we listen to other people's ideas instead of finding out for ourselves.
mm,
And it's always interesting when people that thought they couldn't get along meet each other and find out, oh, we can actually get along. I was prejudiced because of this. And we got to find our own value set and live with it. And we'd be a lot happier.
mm.
Good question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I wish you all the best and we stay in touch.
Yes, please.